I'm so excited to see you all. As Jocelyn said, with that wonderful welcome, I'm Nicole Red, and I lead narrative and cultural strategy at a video network. Yeah. Where we are working to bend the arc of the digital revolution towards shared power, prosperity, and possibility. And as Jocelyn said, we are here today to talk about sci-fi and speculative fiction, not just as entertainment, but really as a tool for imagining and challenging and building the futures that we want to see. And I do just want to say, I think sometimes when people hear sci-fi or speculative fiction and they think, well, that's not for me. I'm not into that. But at its core, science fiction isn't just for some, it's actually for all of us. I think speculative fiction, science fiction, it's about imagining what does not yet exist, building and thinking about worlds that could be. And whether you're a creator or an organizer or just someone who loves a story like me, you're part of this conversation, what that could be, the power of what could be. So with that, I am a very visual person. I'm joined by very visual people, and so I'm going to play a little movie clip. And I just want to ground us in sort of why stories and why science fiction. So we're going to watch a clip from Octavia Butler, who is one of the greatest writers of all time and a personal hero of mine. And she reminds us that sci-fi isn't just about spaceships and aliens, and it's a tool for reimagining humanity itself. So with that, let's watch.
Why science fiction?
Because there are no closed doors, no walls. I mean, the only rule is if you use science, you should use it accurately. You can look at, examine, play with anything, absolutely anything.
What was it
so
about
easy.
writing for you?
Oh, you got to make your own worlds. You got to write yourself in. Whether you were a part of the greater society or not, you got to write yourself in. So I got to write myself in.
And you get to do it in the limited world, as you say, because there are no walls, there are no limits.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you treat subjects like race, sexual prejudice.
Sure.
All of that.
Mm-hmm.
You could put that in
I
a
write about
context that
people.
has all...
I write about people and the different ways of being human. And you can't really do that unless you write about a lot of different kinds of people.
Thank you so much, team. I love that clip, especially when she's saying why stories, because she got to write herself in. Like, we get to write ourselves into stories that we're not always a part of. And it's a powerful reminder that sci-fi is about building worlds with people at the center. She says, I write about people. And it's not just poetic, it's actually scientific. As I was prepping for this, I'm a big science fiction nerd, but I'm also a big psychology nerd, a big neuroscience nerd. And there's a phenomenon called narrative transportation. That means that when you're listening or so deeply immersed in a story, you actually go along with the story as if the events were happening with you or to you, if we're so deeply immersed in it. And that really explains why stories matter. They don't just entertain us, they shape how we see the world and what we think is possible. So think about Star Trek, for the Trekkies out there. In 1966, during the Civil Rights Movement, it dared to put a black woman as a communications officer on the bridge. That was revolutionary for its time. Or Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, written in 1993, which didn't just predict climate disaster, she really predicted that, but it also showed us how community and adaptability could be our most powerful technologies, in fact, for survival. And today, with everything that's going on in our world and everything that we're dealing with, we need visionary storytellers more than ever. And so with that, I'm going to take a moment to introduce our incredible panelists. First, we have Kamala Avila Salmon, who is a film producer transforming Hollywood's approach to storytelling, from leading inclusive content at Lionsgate and now heading up her own production company. We have Lynn Maxey, a writer, a social justice advocate, and the brilliant mind behind some of The Handmaid's Tale's most powerful and formative episodes. We have Sarah Papazaglakis, who is a tech ethicist currently at Meta, and a speculative fiction scholar who helps teams create tech innovations that benefit people and society. And Teresa Heiss-Ramili, an assistant professor of geography at Ohio State University, and her work explores Black geographies of the past, present, and the future through speculative fiction and lived experience. So please join me in welcoming our incredible panel. So excited. Okay, so let's take it back to the personal. Let's start with something personal. I want to think about the first time sci-fi wasn't just entertainment for you, the moment that it clicked to something quite profound. Maybe it was a book, or it was a film, or something that helped you imagine different possibilities for yourself. Yeah. What was that moment? We will kind of go in order. So, Kamala, what was that moment for you?
So, this is the second time that we've been able to have this conversation with you, and it was the question you opened with first, and I admitted I was one of those people who thought sci-fi is just not for me, I'm not that genre. And I think, I don't know, anyone else can relate here. Part of it was sort of almost subconsciously, I didn't see myself in most of those stories. So I was like, oh, this is for young white boys, or this is for someone else. And as I was thinking about it, I think the things that now come to mind is, one would be a film like Black Panther, that I think I remember being in Hollywood and feeling so excited, but hearing so much skepticism around in the industry. So many of the white gatekeepers just were like, well, this is not gonna work, right? Because in their mind, there is the sci-fi superhero universe of fanboys over here, and then there's Black films, and reminding people that Black is not a genre. One of my will get that on my headstone one day. And having them see that there is a huge audience for the intersection of specific cultural identities that have been excluded often from sci-fi, and sci-fi as a genre. So that's probably my first. And then actually one of the shows that this young lady worked on with a character named Moira and Samira, that was the first time I'd seen really a Black woman in a dystopian type of universe, and she's such a warrior and a fighter, and that was incredible. And there was a Disney Plus cartoon that I actually discovered with my son. So we're trying to be intentional. He's here today. We try to be intentional about watching things that have faces that look like ours. And you run very quickly out of those stories when you start going through, because we haven't made that much. There's a beautiful Afrofuturist cartoon called Iwaju that is just so awesome. And it's young Nigerian girls and boys, and I didn't have a show like that when I was his age. And so we need more of that, and it's so transformational when you actually get a chance to see yourself. Envision us in the future, we are gonna be there too.
Lynn, what about you?
Yes, I love this question, and I too have been thinking about it since the first time we talked about it. And there's a couple of different answers. Star Trek is one of them. It was really, not just the original series, but particularly Voyager, and Next Generation, where there were women in positions of power in a way that I just hadn't seen before, I hadn't been aware of before, and it kind of gave me a vision for, oh, I too could lead. And I think as a writer, one of the first times that I really started putting myself into my work was on The Handmaid's Tale, because I was writing a character she was an editor, I was a writer, we were around the same age, we were both married to men named Luke. It just very quickly became this moment of oh wait, who do I want to be? Who do I want to encourage others that they can be as well? What do I want to put out into the world? And it made all the difference for me.
Hi everybody. So I come at this from both being an insider, outsider in tech, and also a scholar of literature and history. And my favorite genres were always magical realism, melodrama, and historical fiction. So science fiction really was not my bailiwick. I always turned the channel at X-Files and other kinds of things. And the first time I was really getting into science fiction was because I was required to in a literature class. Lucky me. So reading Frankenstein as the first order text of science fiction, of modern science fiction, is where I began, and found myself really surprised at how much I enjoyed the story. Not just the human story there about, searching for your father and human connection, but really about actually what the pursuit of science could do to someone. And that relentless pursuit and how it deteriorates kind of your mental health, other kinds of things was really compelling to me. And that led me down different paths of reading Octavia Butler, learning a lot about how, publishers originally wanted to put her in self-help sections because no one knew where to put her in terms of a generic formula. And so I just kept going with the oddball science fiction in a way of like what was on the margins. And for me, it was never about seeing myself reflected so much in stories, but of seeing different ways of understanding the world around me, which I always found I was able to find through film, movies, and novels, more so than I was able to just through real life alone.
I also wasn't interested in science fiction throughout my childhood, and I actually was first really introduced to it looking for community in grad school. The Black Student Center on campus had organized a speculative fiction book club, and only, besides the person who organized it, who was a grad student, 2 other people showed up, me and an astronomy grad. And the book we were starting with was a graphic novel in Bitter Root series. And so we had our first meeting, we had pizza, we talked a little bit, and then the next week the pandemic hit and everything closed down. And the person who was leading it reached out to us and said, do you want to just kind of continue the group, even though we've only had 1 meeting, we have these books that we can still use and we can continue to meet on Zoom. And we have continued meeting every week since 2020. And we're not reading together as much, but that's how it started. We went through the entire Bitter Root series together, and then our friendship continued. And that was what drew me to the story and drew me into the story, was reimagining the past and how Bitter Root was storytelling about Black communities and Black heroes, that the story is set in the 1920s. And so that just opened me up, and I just started devouring them.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing it, Dawn. Then I'm going to kind of kick things off with you. So, The Handmaid's Tale isn't just sort of telling a dystopian storytelling, but it's also kind of a mirror that's been held up to society, right? Like, it has helped us to almost foreshadowing, right? Which I know you say it wasn't supposed to be.
Yeah, I don't know, almost.
Yeah. But I guess, how did you balance though? Because there's so many hard and difficult themes in that work. How did you balance bringing hope? Like, how did you balance talking about dystopia, talking about the loss of rights, talking about the difficult lives that immigration and migration that was going on in the Handmaid's Tale? How did you balance that with the themes of hope and bringing that in?
I think that, I love this question because one of the things that I say a lot in the things that I write is no matter how dark it seems, there's always hope. I'm always looking for stories where there's that piece of human connection that, like, we need each other. None of us are meant to make it through life alone. And you have in something like The Handmaid's Tale, these terrible things that are happening. And there's a couple pieces to this. One is, I didn't want to tell a story where this is a terrible thing that's happening and nothing like this has ever happened before and these people are the only people that have ever gone through it. There's something about these kinds of things happen all over the world. There are many people all over the world that have walked through tons of things like this. And at the same time, they've also found joy and connection in community. They've still made beautiful art and beautiful music, and they've still found ways of connecting with others, with people in the outside world. And so to really get to bring that in, I really spent a lot of time thinking about the relationships at the center of The Handmaid's Tale, whether it's June and Moira and their best friend, like, you are my ride or die person, we're gonna be there forever. Like, that's how you get through the difficult times, is with that ride or die person. Or if it's someone that you love, it's that same connection that makes those terrible moments a little less terrible, but also helps you find your people for creating a new way out of the dystopia, which is what I wanted to focus on in life.
And despite everything that's happening, the people is actually what the story's about.
Yeah.
Like we said.
Yeah, very much so.
Sarah, obviously you straddle both tech ethics and storytelling, and where lots is going on in big tech right now, obviously. But maybe keeping it to sort of storytelling and pop culture, you know, we're seeing the explosion of these tools like Midjourney and ChatGPT that are really impacting the creative industry. At the same time, I think pop culture is kind of grappling with how to portray these technologies. You know, I think about Black Mirror and its cautionary tales, but also Her and its kind of discussion, helping us to imagine AIs and companionship, which we'll talk a little bit about later on a different panel. We'll plug that. And so, how has working within these organizations, specifically Meta, helped you to, what kind of shaped your view on what stories we need right now? Are there any feelings or narratives that you really feel like we need urgently in this home? Personally?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one I'm not going to be able to fully satisfactorily answer, but I think a big challenge that we have in the storytelling space with technology is that we have so many dystopian stories and then a few utopian stories like Star Trek that really recreates this binary kind of portrayal of technology as either an ultimate good or an ultimate kind of monolith that we will never be able to get out of, that is this constant I over us. And I think for me, working in the tech industry as someone with a literary and policy background, is that every single product starts first as a story. You have to imagine first what it is that you even want to build, and then who it's going to be for, what tasks it's meant to perform, and then you start getting into the people who are really centered, oftentimes in the story of product making, which is the engineers who are going to build the code for that. And it can be really easy to forget that there are so many people shaping the vision of what a technology should be first, before we even get to the engineers who are building it. We're all a part of that. And one thing we see, I think, reflected really well in Hollywood and a lot of the storytelling is a dime a dozen to see the negative impacts reflected back to you on about technologies. How many Black Mirror episodes, how many other stories, and I think that's hugely important. I use them all the time in scenario building to help people understand that the thing that they built thinking is going to be this great tool, all the ways that they're not thinking about how it could go wrong and how important that is to be centered in the story of making tech from the get-go. But I think we really need these stories that also shape what is that middle ground in which we are reminded that we are the agents of these technologies. The technologies are simply tools here at our service. And we have choices even when we have massive corporations, other entities now trying to automate everything, that what are the tools at our disposal and the technologies that are within us, the technologies of community. I'm so excited, sadly I think it's happening maybe concurrently, but a story about public interest technology, for example, of how we can shape that future. I don't think we have enough stories about that. And I think Octavia Butler continues to be, I know sometimes she's often two-sided in some circles and then completely erased out of other circles of science fiction in this odd way, but what she does so beautifully in her novels is technology is always there, shaping relationships, shaping the society, but her story centers how people are overcoming that, how they are finding these liminal spaces of opportunity to shift the power dynamics in which they find collective power. And the other thing I love about her stories is community is such a technology in them. With her hyper empathy, things like that. There is no rogue individual in her stories that is out there just superheroing the world. They are always bound to other people and having to navigate that.
No, I love what you're saying. So the power of the collective. I'm going to push you a little bit. What would you say? I think, especially in this moment, there's so much happening, and I think there's a lot of people who feel like powerless. How do I impact change, or how do I affect this humongous industry that seems to be going at a rapid warp speed? How do I impact that? What would you say to people who feel that way?
Yeah, well, as one of them, I would say one of the things I'm finding is building a community of people who want to have that conversation and create an outlet for that in ways that you can really build something. So that's like Teresa and I started collaborating together, for example, 2.5 years ago through science fiction, and have since then built a deeper community around a project we call Autonomous Futures, and are now trying to expand that from being an archive of text about a different story we could tell about technology to actually build community conversation. And I think that's the first one, because again, Toni Morrison, so much of like Black authorship and freedom studies have talked about you have to first imagine it in order to have it. And so for me, it's always beginning with what are the stories we want to tell, and none of these tools or methods are going to be monoliths that will solve a thing. So in addition to telling ourselves different stories and figuring out the stories we want to be able to tell about how we resist what's happening now and affect change and the different ways we might need to do it, I think you also have then classic examples of how you resist: protesting, logging off certain platforms, using your consumer voice to tell people that you don't like what is happening in this space. And then I think the third thing is really a space for civil society to come in and fund projects that actually offer alternatives, and finding groups where you can find a collective voice to make that demand in spaces that can actually help to fund it, push it forward, and make those things happen. So it's not just an idea as well.
So, thank you. Teresa, I'm going to bring you in here, especially with the Metro Autonomous Futures. How do you feel that storytelling can help us to sort of really tangibly understand these tech futures that we want to work towards? And how is your work on its impact of that?
Yeah, so I'm an educator, so I have to say that I will always say that they're helping me, they continue to help me, and I hope that they're helping other people to learn about ourselves and to learn about different histories of technology, of how even the term technology is co-opted in a lot of ways by major companies of, AI is technology and VR is technology, but a pencil isn't technology, paper isn't a technology, and it is. And what we spend a lot of time talking about is hope as a technology and imagination as a technology, and these things that you can't even materialize in the way that we think of technology being able to do. And so that sci-fi and speculative fiction really pushed me to think about the different technologies that I need in my life and that I want in the future that are sustainable for people and for the planet, and then to also learn about the ways that communities have used these different technologies throughout time. And so in my work, something I'm very much interested in and thinking about all the time is histories of resistance within Black communities from throughout the transatlantic slave trade in the Caribbean and in the U.S., histories of marriage, which is the refusal to participate in slavery by fleeing the plantation and living in the mountains and building community with indigenous people and poor white people and other formerly enslaved people in the swamps and in the mountains, and creating an alternative society. The ways that those histories are communicated in a lot of speculative fiction and show up in our imaginations of the future is also telling me something about how this work has been done in the past that we can then bring with us into our present moment and into the futures in our world building of the futures of us.
The importance of looking back to new original work as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm going to bring you in. sort of thinking about this and continuing to think about these stories that we feel like are missing. From your approach, especially being a big, deeply part of entertainment and of the Hollywood space, what do you feel is missing right now? And what structures do we need to overcome in order to get those stories out into the world that we need in this moment?
So I think that one of the things that we're grappling with right now, both inside of the industry and also just sort of in the broader society right now, is like a crisis of imagination. Like, I think we are I'm seeing, especially in this moment, so much preemptive, what I would call preemptive acquiescence, preemptive compliance. People are just like, let me comply in advance. It's like, nobody asked you to do that, right? And so I think that we need to be telling stories that show people being fearless, being bold, and being sort of deviating from sort of falling in line. And so one of the things that I remember really loving and appreciating about Black Panther, and why I feel like we need more of even those types of stories, is one of the reasons why it resonated so deeply is that it imagined an African country untouched by the impacts of colonization, right? And we have been sold very much single stories of the continent of Africa that basically present it as a place that was, yes, colonized, but like waiting to be modernized and saved by the Western world. And this idea of creating a story that showed that like, actually they would have been not only just fine, but like they might have thrived. They might actually have some of the most precious materials and minerals in the world. They might actually have built incredible schools and communities and had deep familial bonds. Like, we would have been okay. But I feel like we need more stories that really reinforce the idea that like, we do not need a white patriarchal society to hold us up and hold us together. That is not the only structure in which we can live. And so I'm really excited about writers and storytellers that are envisioning worlds where underrepresented communities are empowered and autonomous and joyful and loving. And I think that part of what we need to overcome from a structural perspective is that, you know, we are still in a very limited ecosystem when it comes to the people that get to say, yes, this is a story that is worth investing in, right? Like, yes, we're seeing so many cataclysmic events and transformational moments of disruption in the business model, but as the consolidation is happening, one of the things that people aren't necessarily thinking about is as you go from 10 studios to 6 or 6 to 4, it means now there's 4 people that if you have an idea that requires more than $5 million, there's 4 people that can tell you that is valid and worthy. That is deeply problematic for a million reasons. And you would not be surprised to find out that none of them look like me. There's one that is a woman. That's kind of it, right? And that doesn't mean that like there aren't lots of people working inside of those studios. I was one of the people working inside of the studios, sitting in those green light meetings, pushing for those stories, advocating for them. But when you have a lens that is like things that are white, male, cis, are mainstream, and everything else is other, when you're pitching, there is a failure of imagination to imagine how it might appeal to other people. Stories about women aren't only for women and girls. Stories about Black people aren't only for Black people. And so I think that like the other thing that we need, both through speculative fiction and just sort of across the content ecosystem, is for people to tell stories that center underrepresented groups, but couch them in themes and storylines and plots that truly can be universal. We can be just as universal as any other community. We have absorbed what I heard someone call yesterday like a malignant normalcy, right? Which I was like, ooh, that's really deep, right? It's like every single person that is telling a story is telling it from their perspective, right? There are no perspectiveless stories. There is no neutral, but we very much absorbed a white as neutral. And I think using something like speculative fiction and science fiction to imagine things that haven't yet existed and then create in people a hunger to actually pursue futures that look more like that, to actually believe they can be agents of change, they can be agents of progress inside of this ecosystem, I think is something that is so amazing. And because we don't always have the history to reflect, we kind of have to project from our imagination things that haven't existed yet, because we know that we actually are capable of being the lead of any kind of story.
This failure of there are so many things. Hi, Christian. Stop. This failure of imagination, it almost seems like it's happening from the consumer standpoint and the structural standpoint. And so it's hard for folks in the industry to imagine what could be. And it's also hard for us as watchers, readers, consumers. We don't have necessarily an idea of where we're going or how technology can serve as those truths, what you were saying earlier, like how tech can serve as adaptability or joy or community. Because we don't really have that represented in pop culture. How do we get there? How do we get there? And everyone can wait as well.
I think one of the things that pops right off of everything that you said is this idea about imagination and realizing that, like, for instance, if a male-driven white superhero movie fails at the box office, everyone goes, "Oh, that was a bad movie," or like, "That movie didn't work." Then what happens if you have, say, a female-driven superhero story and it fails at the box office? Everyone goes, "Oh, see, this is why we don't have female-driven stories." Like, the one becomes reflective of all rather than just seeing it for what it is for itself. And I think if we can move past that, I think that would help. I also would just love to see people taking risks, like viewers taking risks, watching a movie where no one looks like you, no one sounds like you. Watch movies with a subtitle song. Watch shows that are from all over the world. Like, just take risks, because the more you do, the more it becomes the normal thing that you do. And then all of a sudden you're gonna find yourself, referencing an incredible show that no one around you has heard of, and now you're the person sharing it. And I would also just love to see, like, I've had meetings here recently where there's a bit of a drive to, like, no, tell stories in this box. Tell stories in this box right now because of where we are, because of where the world is going. And I thankfully have been able to say no. I'm not going to tell stories in those boxes. It means I've lost out on opportunities and jobs, but it also means that I'm telling the stories that I want to be telling, where I want to be pushing that proverbial envelope. But it's really hard to do it. I'm trying to think of a good way to say this. Like, it's difficult to do it on our own, and it's really difficult when we all feel like we're on our own trying to do any of this. And so if there's, maybe this is how I want to wrap this all up, like, if there's anything I can encourage you all in, is, like, every single time you do anything, you take those risks, whether you're a viewer, a buyer, a writer, a director, like, all of those add up over time. And it means that everything is going to move possibly slower than we want it to, but it is moving towards a more inclusive future with stories that are just gorgeous and different, and they bring in and center different perspectives than just what has, like, typically had, a million movies and television shows already.
Thank you. Yes, I will come to you. Just so you know, we're going to open for questions in 5 minutes, so start thinking about questions for these amazing people. Teresa?
Yeah, I think, for how, I think I was thinking about curiosity, and coming back, Kamala, to your point about just the universal image of this white identity, and really is, like, the ideology that shows up. So when we have diverse characters, they're not always representing diverse perspectives, right? They're just the same ideology, but with black skin or with brown skin or with, female figures. And so one thing that speculative fiction does so well in helping me think about is how do I learn a different way of being in the world? How do I learn to not understand humans or myself above animals and plants and the natural materials that we need to build these technologies? How do I understand a different way of hearing, feeling, knowing, storying with these different elements in our world? And so especially Afrofuturists, Indigenous futurists, African futurists, which is also a different thing, are so useful in doing that, in breaking that mold of replicating really white supremacist ideologies of that humans are better than or different than, or that we should develop our world in expense of other than humans for the survival and continuation of humans. I knew that.
So good. And Teresa, I want to stay with you a moment because you do so much work engaging young people and the next generation in speculative storytelling and decolonial design. How do you feel like we bring the next generation to all this? Because I think it's one thing for folks like us to be having these conversations. It's a whole different thing for us to be thinking about what next. How does the next generation really care about this, latch onto it, and continue the work? How are you seeing that reflected in your work? How are you doing?
Yeah, I love using speculative fiction as a way to teach about geography, specifically about futures, about design and imagination. And I think at the core is taking seriously imaginations for the future, and not having the knee-jerk reaction of that's impossible, which is what speculative fiction opens up for us, that you're already going in curious and interested in knowing what this world that's being constructed is, and approaching youth imaginations in that way of, okay, this sounds completely untenable, but what if it wasn't? And engaging with them in that way. What if the designs that they came up with, what if we could actually create them? What are they telling us in wanting a candy bridge that takes them right from home to school or something? What is that actually communicating with us of something that they want, something that's beautiful, that's fun, that's enjoyable for them in their environment? That's how I start thinking about places.
It'll be so interesting to see also what they come up with, especially as a generation that have a completely different relationship to technology than we did generations past as well.
Yeah.
Good. Yes. Come on, Louis. You want to weigh in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a couple of things I was thinking about with respect to the how, and I guess my answer is that we have to be deeply aware of the structures in the machine that exists while we are also trying to build something new. And so, working at Lionsgate, I got a chance to be inside of the studio system and sit in dozens and dozens of green light meetings and see what didn't get the green light, right? And understanding the why. You may not always agree with the narratives that are happening in terms of why this can or can't work, but you need to really understand how the system is interpreting the stories that you're telling. So I think one of the ways that we do the how is that we understand how the machine is working and think about how we can use that to reverse engineer things that will pass muster but will also deeply serve the storytelling needs and goals that we have. So for instance, on the feature side, there are some pretty consistent levers that studios will look at when it comes to whether or not to make a movie, right? There is who's in it, who's in front of the camera, who's making it, who's the director, what's the budget, what's the genre, and then sometimes there's some kind of an X factor, right? If you know and you understand that, then you can sort of say, all right, I want to tell this type of story, right? And so I know that let's say I'm an emerging director and I am going to be I'm not going to be a valuable piece in their mind, even though I know I created this story and I'm the one to direct it. Then it's okay, what are some of the other variables that I can bring then, right? Then I need to bring a really powerhouse producer because that is going to tip the scale for them and make them see it as less risky. I could make the $25 million version, but if I can be smart enough to figure out how to make the $15 million version, then now I've lowered the financial bar to entry. Right? If I'm gonna direct it, then maybe I do need to get a really higher level actor in it to balance you can't have everything, but you can absolutely have something. So holding on to what the core intention is behind the story. And sometimes I always ask people, like, is your intention to get the story made? And what will you do to get the story made? Or is it your intention to get the story written, right? Because that you can control by yourself, right? If we need to make it with other people, then we need to figure out how we can balance. But then I think also at the same time, we have to be thinking like outsiders all the time. And so I love what you said, Lynn, and others about sort of the power and the technology of community. I heard someone say the quote recently that, like, if you can build it on your own, you're not thinking big enough. And so when you are trying to do really ambitious things, think about what is the team that you need to assemble to help you deliver that. And some of that is going to get tied back into what I was saying before about, like, do I need a producer, a certain type of actor? Like, what kind of advocacy do I need? Oh, I need to build outside the system. Is there a brand that might want to fund this? Like, just thinking different, right? You have to think insider, outsider all the time.
Knowing we want to get to questions, can I just build on that from the industry, tech industry, and if not represent a tech industry perspective, I guess I want to be clear on that, but working in there, similarly, knowing what tools I have to bring in to get certain user groups represented, to use the language of the industry. And I think the way that the double standard we've been talking about in terms of what tech gets made, similar to what feature films and stories get made into films and TV, what happens there in the similar context is a double standard around, we see routinely tech executives naming their companies after science fiction stories, being directly inspired by stories to go and build a teleporter machine for VR and different kinds of tools. But when you try to take something from more a different Afrofuturist, indigenous futurist perspective, it's all of a sudden not viable, too fantastical, not something they understand the value of. And there's a secondary thing, which is about getting the industry as a whole to understand the value of curb cut effects. And practically speaking, I don't think we have enough research or data points to be able to really bring inside of industry to say, hey, in the same way that we have a study for how the yellow curb cuts that allow people to walk across the street without having to take a step down the curb that was originally designed in compliance with the ADA, so I do want to give a shout out to the importance of regulation, even though we're not talking about it here, that it's study after study shows that those curb cuts have benefited everybody, whether you have a stroller, whether you have a bum ankle like I have for the last 10 weeks, whether it's just easier not to risk tripping by stepping down that step. Not everyone, but observable studies show that the majority of people choose to walk down that ramp rather than take the step down. And I don't think we have enough studies and data points and that's not the only thing that drives changes in industry, but it's a really important and crucial point to be able to bring in and say, hey, this product was originally made for women. It was originally made for youth. It was originally made for populations typically underrepresented or not represented at all in technology, and yet it has been wildly successful. We have some of those studies coming out about boards that have a certain number of women on them, way outperform other businesses. It's still not shifting to the degree we need it to, how much representation we see on corporate boards, but it has been an important part of shifting the narrative as a data point to show the value and importance of that. I think those kinds of studies are also things that people outside of the industry can be investing in, pulling together, and helping to support the advocacy for technology that really works for all of us, and not quote unquote the early adopters who represents one singular demographic, if you like.
Thank you for adding that. And it's always interesting, I think, to see the parallels between the Hollywood industry and the tech industry, which you wouldn't presume would be
Kamala
connected.
has really opened my mind on that.
Really interesting. Okay, let's go to questions. Questions from the audience.
Ooh, I see one all the way at the back. I'm coming to you. I'm coming right to you. Here we go.
Awesome. Okay, so building on that point exactly, I think that creative workers are creating value for tech companies and where data is used to train the systems that are enriching a lot of these companies. So I was wondering if you see narrative value in thinking of creative workers in these industries as tech workers, and if that provides an opening to create common cause and solidarity with other workers in the tech industry, both engineers who are organizing as well as like Amazon warehouse workers. Is that like, do you see like a way to strengthen and build closer bonds between people across these different sectors who are all contributing to the wealth of the big tech companies as important as an opportunity and a way to build power together?
Great question.
Really great question.
Wow, it's a really powerful question, and I love it. I think just speaking is manifesting that as an opportunity that I think can definitely be built upon. I think what I have seen to be one of the largest struggles, and I'm someone who comes from a nonprofit, then going to get a PhD at being in the academic world, then in public policy, and now my first and probably only corporate job, but being a translator across those different spaces has really enlightened me in the virtue of how much we have to speak of the common vocabulary. And so what you're talking about thinking of creative workers, reframing oneself as a tech worker in that space, I think that's a fantastic idea. And I think partnering with people to learn that vocabulary, I mean, we have, the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. However, being able to speak that language, a common language, build a common vocabulary, and tell those stories, I think is absolutely a winning strategy to start shaping and having more influence in that greater story, and therefore in the industry and in really practical ways about what that means in terms of how people are paid, exploited, all of that in the tech tourism.
And I would also add, as a writer who went on strike specifically so my work wouldn't be trained to use AI in a way that cut me out of the deal and people like me, I think that a lot of this, the connection that could help is also remembering to advocate for like where would the finances be going to that, like making sure that if we're looking at creative workers as tech workers, as we're connecting with each other, that we're advocating for each other to be a part of the financial rewards that our work is creating. I think that that's really important. Like my little WGA brain is in the back being like, oh yes, say this out loud. But I think that that's a really key piece of the conversation, and I now have to go away and think about all this for 3 hours because I love that question so much.
I was just going to say really quickly that I think it made me think of the quote we opened with Octavia Butler, you have to write yourself into the story. And so a lot of what I'm seeing in Hollywood sometimes is this idea of that there's big tech over here, there's AI over here, and then there's us creative humans over here, and it's a fight, right? And I think that I was at a panel yesterday and I heard someone say let's start thinking about AI as about addition, not subtraction, right? There, of course, there's a lot of very well-earned fear about what a capitalist structure is going to do with an assistive technology. But I think that thinking about yourself, if you are creative, as someone who's going to meaningfully be able to shift and direct the direction of how some of these tools will be incorporated, I think is an incredibly important opportunity. As technology is coming in, I tend to have more of a very optimistic view because I feel like humans are really amazing at continuing to find things for themselves to do no matter what technology is created, right? We are always going to be driving, we are always going to be innovating. And so for creatives to ensure that that is not a space that we are ceding. We are gonna actively be a part of the AI conversation as well. We're gonna actively drive that. Creatives are probably going to be the people that are going to unlock the best uses of it because there are things that all of us in our jobs we're this is the part that isn't using the best part of my brain and I have to do it, and how do we leverage technology to do that so that we have more time to do the things that we are singularly best at doing. And so I really would encourage writers and other creatives to think about themselves as sort of a part of the change that's coming versus something that the change is going to come to. Because if the change is coming to you, then you're getting rolled over by it. But if you're like, I'm in the car too, and like you were driving before, but like I'm jumping into the driver's seat because like I can use this in some meaningful ways to push my agenda forward. Because I think that is really where the best disruption is going to come from. Don't allow what is being hearkened as or called the future to be shaped by people that are not you.
No, we're not sliding towards some inexorable future that is like already set. We get to create it.
I love that. And I think that question as well made me think about alternative platforms for distribution of storytelling, because I think, you know, the question talking about labor and storytelling and creatives, there are some platforms, and I'd be curious to hear your take on this, some platforms won't want to distribute certain content that is in opposition to what they stand for. For example, labor, right? And labor rights and unionalizations. And so I think a lot about how do we build alternative tables? How do we build alternative platforms so that when we're creating this content and the storytelling that will ruffle some feathers can be distributed and is still seen? What would you think about that actually from your point structurally, you know?
Yeah, so I feel like it is always going to be a yes and, because there's where we live right now, and right now where we live is like if you're talking about wanting to reach millions and millions of people at the same time, we have the distribution that we have, right? And so part of how I think about it in that ecosystem is like it's definitely Trojan horse storytelling time when it comes to that, right? Like this is a Trojan horse moment. I think about even like movies like Barbie and Wicked. Like those are commercial popcorn movies that like while for those of us who've been thinking about some of these questions about authoritarianism and feminism and like equality, we're sort of like, that's like 101, like I already thought about that. I want the movie about, there's some people who never thought about that. And like when I was watching Wicked through that lens, like there are things being said in that movie about authoritarianism and how like if you make it expensive enough to speak, people won't speak up anymore. Like there are things in it for people to just get little prickles of like, I want to think about that a little bit more, right?
Seed planting.
Seed planting, right? Like we need to be planting seeds of like different futures. But then I also think when it comes to alternative distributions, there are people that are trying to build things that can disrupt, you know, the idea that like there's only 4 ways to get your movie or television show to people. Like that is bad, right? We need to also build other things. So I saw Christine here earlier who's working on Kinema, which is a disruptive distribution technology and platform. And I think learning about what those platforms are and sharing those with people, because right now we have a scale problem. And so there's not enough people in the alternative distribution systems to be able to influence the number of people that you want to reach. And so we are at this tension, and so I think we have to sort of build and think about both. I'm not ready to seed the major institutions, like all of the millions, so that like they can talk to the millions, and I'm like, I'll make a little story for 5 people. Like, no, I want to make a story for the millions.
Other questions? No more tonight, Triple?
I think we might want to have a quick wrap up.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's wrap up time. This has been such a good conversation. Okay, if I'm going to wrap us up really quickly, what is one story, and give examples if you'd like, of one example of a story that folks that are shaping up technology right now should watch? What is one example of something that those in shaping technology should be aware of or should watch?
Let's start out there.
Oh, great. Okay, well, my answer to this is easy, I guess. So you can access on Prime a Afro-futurist musical that is in multiple languages, and it's called Neptune Frost. And it is the most beautiful film. I'm completely obsessed with it and have been thinking about it constantly for the past couple of years. What's it called? Yeah, Neptune Frost.
Hey, nothing that's my exactly.
It brings together the themes that of marriage that brings together the histories and the, what's going on in East and Central Africa with resource extraction and mining, and the abuse around human relations with that, as well as trans rights issues and just community building and different things.
And disposable tech, right? Yeah.
The next one.
This way, stuff.
Do that.
I'm just jumping in. I have too many that are going through my head right now, but I will stick with After Yang by Kogonada. It is about, especially in this moment of so much talk on AI companions, and Meta's foray into humanoid robotics. This is a story about a robotic assistant / companion for a young girl, and the family purchases a refurbed version, and it is a commentary on how much memory, like actual tech memory, when we want to refurbish devices, gets carried over, and then it is also about the deeply human connection between assistants and assistive technologies. And I think it's a beautiful story that comments on how the next generation is thinking about that relationship, because the parents relate very differently than the young woman featured in the film does. And yeah, just all around great story.
What was the title again?
After Yang. And I believe it's on Canopy. It used to be on, I think it's come off of Prime and other things. It might be exactly a little harder to find.
Lynn?
I have a couple different answers to this, but the first answer I'm going to go with is a very classic answer, and I love that this is the book that got you into sci-fi in the first place. But I would say Frankenstein more than anything, because it is a book that was written by a teenage girl essentially on a dare on summer break, and it created an entirely new genre that we're still getting to explore today. I think it does a really great job of exploring the difference between impact and intent, which feels very important in the tech space. And it's also just a phenomenal book that everyone should read over and over, and I love it. But then I would also say I would suggest anything that centers someone that does not look like you, that does not speak like you, that is a different genre, a different gender, a different orientation, whatever that looks like. Read something from not your perspective and see where that gets you.
Well, this is out.
Sure. So I was thinking of a million things and nothing at the same time. Then my husband mouths to me, they cloned Tyrone. I think that's what his folks were saying.
Tyrone is a good one.
And I agree that that film is awesome, and so highly recommend. The first thing that actually came to my mind, on his face doesn't seem to have tech anywhere in it, but I think that it's really important, and that is the Woman King. I actually feel like seeing stories that really reframe what power and strength looks like through a Black female lens, the idea of matriarchal power, the idea of sharing power, the idea of collaboration, bravery. Like, I think that as we are running into the future, there is either the tension between people who assume like, it's gonna be fine, it's gonna be like what it was before, you guys are all overreacting, and the road to autocracy is paved with people telling you that you're overreacting. We should definitely react. Or people being like, it's all lost, we may as well comply, like there's nothing to do, they voted, they want it, that's it. And like, we can actually do better than that, and we can have both vigilance but also audacity and like strength, so like that's exciting to me. So I feel like that would be a really powerful one. And then one is one that I'm working on, so maybe one day you guys will be able to watch it. But it is a fun thriller about a group of Gen Z friends that are finding that like it's structurally impossible to make ends meet in this world that we're in. And they're all working for the same sort of faceless, nameless billionaire, and they're like, we need to do a little mini heist on you. And I think just sort of like having people who are in the ecosystem realize what day-to-day people are dealing with and think about building for us, not against us, I think is really important. So hopefully if I can make all those chess pieces I talked about before balance out, that will be a movie in a couple of years that you guys can see.
Incredible. Isn't this just the most incredible panel? Please join me. Incredible. Thank you so much.